Time for another Soccer Down Here 1v1, and this one's very, very special. We get to catch up with the newest FIFA referee for the United States, and the first from the great state of Mississippi, someone whose matches I have been able to be gracious enough to call in a USL Championship. It is Alyssa Nichols. Alyssa, thanks for hanging out with us for a 1v1, and congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm super excited about the appointment. So looking
All
forward
right.
to it.
So let's just go back to the beginning. I know that folks who have seen you in the center, that they know you from the time when they're watching matches or watching ESPN Plus and everything, and they go, "Oh, okay, so that's who that is."
Yeah.
When did you get the interest in the sport in and of itself, and how did that turn to wanting to be an official?
Yeah. So I started playing soccer when I was younger. In high school, my parents would not let me get a job because I played multiple sports. So they were like, you don't really have time to balance school, sports, and a job on top of that. But I wanted a little bit of extra money so I could kind of do things that I wanted to do that I wouldn't have to necessarily ask my parents for the money. So I had a friend who was officiating like U8, so like 7 to 8 year old kids in a local league in the area. And she was like, hey, this is super flexible. Like, I'm sure your parents will let you do it. Like, you already play, so you understand what's happening. You can make a little bit extra money, and there's no commitment other than obviously you have to take the certification course. So I was like, okay, I'm going to shoot my shot, see if my parents will let me do this. And so surprisingly, they did. They were like, okay, but you can't do it too much. You can't do it on school nights, a lot of restrictions. So pretty much the weekends that I was free when I wasn't playing, I would do like 7 to 8 year old kids. And which is basically like coaching at that point because you're kind of teaching them like how to do a throw in, when the ball goes out of play, what they should do. So that's how it started. Surprisingly, I had a mentor who was also a referee assigner who was a state referee at the time. And he was like, oh, like you look kind of cool, like running up and down the field. He was like, have you ever thought about upgrading? And obviously I had no idea what he was talking about. I was like, I'm just doing this because I need some extra cash. And so I was like, okay, what does that entail? And he was like, well, you just have to take another course and you have to do this many, a certain amount of games. So I was like, okay, sure, why not? Like, I'm already out here. I'll do that. What he didn't tell me was that it was going to go from me being on the field by myself with 7 and 8 year olds to it being 3 officials and much older kids. So at that point, that's when I was introduced to parents that were very involved in the game, as well as players who were a lot more emotional because 7 8 year olds, they may cry if they get pushed, but like they weren't going to yell at you. So that was kind of my beginning of how that happened. And then from there, it was just opportunities were presented. And I, at that point, had fallen in love with it. And as some people say in the referee community, like you get bit by the bug and then it's history from there. So yeah, that's how it started. That's how I got into it, which is amazing to see like how that turned into this.
How long did it take you to develop a thick skin? Because I imagine that when you're starting with U7s and U8s, it's the scrums that we always anticipate, just kind of
Yep.
these masses that move up and down.
Yep.
But when you get into being a part of a team and being a part of a squad,
Yeah.
you've got to develop the thick skin. How long did it take for you to develop that thick skin to where you don't let things get to you like the parents and the players
Yeah.
and stuff like that?
Yeah. I would say for me personally, it probably took about 3 years. Just because I was younger. So I was like still a teenager. So some of it emotionally would really bother me. Like after the game, I'd be like, wow, they were really mean. Like, was I really that bad? Like I couldn't have been that bad, right? So it wasn't until I probably was roughly maybe like 19-ish. So I would say maybe 2.5, 3 years where at that point I was kind of used to it. And I was like, okay, even if I'm right, they're still going to yell at me. So like at this point, like, don't worry about the yelling, just focus on the game and enjoy the experience. And I think at that point, that's when I was kind of like, okay, I'm good. Like it doesn't bother me at that point.
How long did it take you to develop your own personal style? Because I know that, we can look at center refs and
Mhm.
ARs and, it's either there's either flair or it's straight up business or, you're a blackjack dealer. How long did it take you to develop your own personal style and how folks get to see you out there on the field?
Yeah. I would say probably roughly around the same time frame, probably about 3 years. Because you kind of figure out like what works for you, what doesn't work for you, what you feel comfortable doing, what you feel comfortable saying, what you feel comfortable managing with players, with coaches, like how you interact with them. You kind of learn from like stubbing your toe, like, okay, let me try this. Oh, that did not work. So maybe let's not do that. Or, hey, I did this and it felt natural for me to respond this way or handle it this situation this way. So now I'm going to go with that. And that works for you. So I think for me, it was probably roughly around the same time that I got the thick skin.
How much stereotyping did you have to face when it came to learning those first 3 years about learning about what it's like to be a part of a team and then learning about who you were out there on the pitch? Because I imagine that there are probably some who still do some stereotyping, but how long did it take you to kind of just understand, I'm just going to push through that and not deal with that nonsense?
So funny thing is, so actually when I was coming up, I didn't deal with it the first 2 or 3 years as much. And that was more so because I knew a lot of the people in the area, because I played and I was around them a lot before I started refereeing. So I didn't really deal with it locally that much, just because I think of the personal relationship that I had with a lot of the coaches and like a lot of the players, and they'd seen me around before. It wasn't until I started doing like adult games, and like semi-professional games that I ran into that type of scenario, I guess you would say. And so I think I would say that would probably have been like 4 to 5 years after I started refereeing. And at that point, I would say when I got used to it pretty quick, just because like you get used to, especially as a woman, like you get used to being in the arena or in the stadium in this capacity by yourself often. So like it kind of is like either you figure it out or you get out. And so it was pretty quick transition from that, I would say, just because for the longest, I was the only female that would go to tournaments, like in our area. I was the only female that were doing a lot of the games, a lot of the training. It was just me and a bunch of guys. So I would say probably 4 or 5 years into it, I would say I kind of dealt with it and got past it.
How would you describe yourself stylistically? Because I know that, we'll look at center refs and we'll say, we'll look at somebody like an Ismail Elfath and we'll say he has a certain style. You look at somebody like a Chris Penso and he has a certain style. How would you describe yourself stylistically out there in the middle?
So funny thing is like, so people always tell me like, you look so mean on the field. Like you have this really serious face. And the funny thing is like, when I interact with players and on the field, I'm very relaxed. It's usually a very casual conversation until it needs to, like, that body language or that conversation needs to change. But I'm usually pretty calm. I'm usually pretty relaxed, but I just have one of those faces, I guess. Like when I'm focused on something, it just looks really intense. But I'm more of a manager. I like to talk more to players, and I like to, if I can, find a way to get the solution without just giving lots of cards. Personally, that's just my take on how I approach the game. But obviously, misconduct has to be issued. It has to be issued. But I prefer to talk and try to get to a solution instead of, just giving a lot of misconduct personally.
What's the biggest misconception that folks have about refereeing in general when it comes to whether it's the amount of work, the amount of hours, the travel? What are some of the bigger misconceptions that folks have?
I think it would be the amount of time that we spend dissecting games after the game. I got asked this question a while ago, like, oh, like, do you guys watch the game after you officiate it? And I'm like, do we watch it? Like, wow. I was like, I probably spend after one game, I probably spend anywhere to 4 to 6 hours, like because we clip every decision in the game, whether it's a yellow card, a foul, a penalty area decision, a red card. We clip everything. We watch it in slow motion. We watch it in live play. We look at our positioning. What were we focused on? What were we saying? We listen to like the communication between the crew. So there's a lot of things that happen after the game. And I think a lot of people don't realize like how much time we actually take to analyze so we can learn and grow and develop for the next game.
How have you grown and evolved as a ref over the last handful of years? And I'll save the second half of this question for after this answer.
Okay. I would say just being more comfortable and being more confident. Especially when I first started doing professional games, you want to get the right decision and you're very hyper focused on everything that sometimes you may miss things. So I think once you get, for me personally, like when I developing was like, okay, now I can like open up to the entire field and see the game versus like being kind of tunnel vision on like what's happening directly in front of me. So I would say that would be the biggest thing that I would say I've developed over the last couple of years.
So then what do you think you still need to work on as a center ref? Because you mentioned it's like, I break everything down at real time and slow mo, like 9 different angles. What do you think you still need to work on to continue to grow, you think?
Yeah. So I think obviously like as a referee, just like with players, we're always learning, we're always developing, we're always growing. And for me personally, positioning is still something that's always changing based off of the game, based off of the way the players are set up, based off of the speed. Are they counterattack? Like, are they trying to play, direct? Are they passing the ball around the back? And knowing where to be and when you need to be there. And that changes every game. So I think for me, something that I'm still working on is being able to recognize that early in the game and be able to adjust, because we also watch clips from the players, from the teams before the game to determine like, okay, what do we need to look forward to? What should we be expecting in these situations? So we kind of know for the most part how the teams are going to play, but sometimes they make adjustments and we also have to be able to make those adjustments during the game to be in the right position. So that's something I think I'm still developing and growing in that area.
The pride of Jackson, Mississippi, Alyssa Nichols hanging out with us here for a Soccer Down Here 1v1, the newest FIFA ref for the United States, the first from the great state of Mississippi, hanging out with us. Now, the second half of my question, do you think of yourself as a role model now? And have you thought of yourself as a role model now in the middle?
Yeah, so funny thing, I've always been like the younger one in groups. So I've never really thought of myself as a role model. I've always just been like, I want to go after this. I want to fight. I want to, grow. I want to pursue these goals. But I'm now realizing like in roles that I've been in the last couple of years is that whether you want to be or not, people are watching and they're learning from what you're doing. So I think I'm realizing now, like, obviously I am a role model. I never expected myself to be in that situation. I never was like necessarily looking for it, but I do think so. And I think for me now, it's even more so like I want to set the example of one for women, one for, Black people, that we can get there and how to get there and how to do it the right way, and just follow your dreams. So for sure, yeah.
How did FIFA let you know that you now can wear the FIFA badge? Was it like FedEx envelope? Was it carrier? Was it an email or did somebody from FIFA in their blue blazer come knock on your door there, in Tampa and go, hey, guess what? Now, how did this happen?
Yeah. So funny thing is that it's a process. So you get invited to international tournaments. You get invited to tournaments within your country. And you're evaluated and you're told like, hey, this person is coming who happens to be from CONCACAF or they happen to be from FIFA and they're going to watch. And you're like, okay, nothing is ever really officially said. And then you get an email, so we got an email at some point during the year that was like, hey, so you've been nominated by your country. Because that's the first step. It's like, but that doesn't mean you're going to get it. It's like, you've been nominated. This is step one. And then you kind of wait and you're like, oh, this is exciting. Like, what's going to happen next? Like, is it going to happen? Is it not going to happen? And so you tell no one because it could not happen. And then after that, you then get another email some months later that says, hey, you've been approved by the board of directors from US Soccer. And it's like, okay, step 2. And then it's like, okay, now you wait for another email that says, you've been approved by CONCACAF. And then you wait more. And then you get another email that says, okay, you've now been approved by FIFA. And so you get all of the approvals. And then it's like the year comes, then, January 1st. And it's like, you've officially been listed on the website. So it's real.
So now, and this is another one of the things that I don't think a lot of folks understand is the mileage that you put on your car or hotels and flights and all these kinds of things.
Yeah.
I mean, how do you keep yourself in shape mentally and physically, knowing that you could be in Kansas City calling an NWSL match and then you could be doing something in USL League One in Tucson, Arizona? How do you balance this to make sure that you're in as good a shape mentally and physically as possible?
So fortunately for a lot of us within Pro 2 or Pro, the group is that we have sports scientists who kind of know our game assignments before we do. So they map out our training, like this is your active recovery day, this is your off day, this is the day you're going to do sprints, this is the day you're going to do high intense interval training, this is the day you're going to go for a long distance run. So we get help in that area so that we can manage at least the physical aspect of it. The mental, emotional part is different for everybody, but for me, I have a 24-hour rule. So it's like 24 hours after that game, you've watched it, you've analyzed it, you've learned from it, and now we move away from it. Like now we mentally check away from it. We've learned these positives and we've learned these, areas of improvement. And now we're moving on. Like now we're focused on the next opportunity or the next game that's coming, but we don't dwell on that game. Whether it was a really good performance or whether it was not a great performance, we don't dwell on it because you're only as good as your next game. So
when you're wearing your Fitbit or however you're monitored these days, how many miles do you put in during an average 90 minutes?
It depends on the league. So I would say average in general, I would say the least would be 5 miles. And it could go anywhere from there. It could go 7 to 8 miles, just depending on if the speed of the game, if there's a lot of long balls. So yeah, it's a lot of running.
So if somebody is busting out the press and then they're just hoofing it long and try to combat that kind of stuff, there's the tennis match back and forth.
Yes, exactly.
All right. So rapid fire. What's the most difficult conditions you've ever reffed in a match?
Snow.
Okay. When was it?
This was actually this year, or actually not this year, but it was 2022. I was in Seattle for Division II women's national championship, the Final Four, and it snowed. So it was like, I want to say it was like 8 degrees. It was very cold, and they had to actually like clear the field of the snow before we could get started. So that was probably, especially for me coming from the South, not really dealing with the cold weather that often, that was an extreme situation. My toes, fingers, everything were hurting.
Furthest away from home you've ever been to ref a match?
Furthest away from home. I would probably say still Seattle. I've been to Seattle a few times, but I would say that would be the furthest. Because I live in Florida now, a lot of the CONCACAF countries are not that far. So they're like maybe an hour, 45-minute flight. So it's pretty close. Even though they're not in the United States, they're still pretty close to where I live now.
Venue that you want to be a center ref in the most?
The most. Is this any league or is this like a specific league?
Any league across the board.
Okay, so for me, like MLS is my goal. Like I want to be a referee in the MLS at some point, and I would say Portland would be like that would be that would be where I would want to be like at some point in my career, like be the center referee in Portland in Major League Soccer.
Yeah. Do you know your itinerary yet for the season, or when do you know when you're going to be traveling and where you're going in 2023?
So I know preseason camps. So we have preseason camps that we have to attend. I know that schedule, but as far as game assignments, we get a 2-week notice. And it's performance based. So that's why it's kind of like a short notice. So we get a 2-week notice for domestic, and sometimes it also could be international assignments could also be as well as 2 weeks. Usually you get a little more wiggle room. If it's a tournament, they know ahead of time, like, okay, you're going to go to the tournament. So they give you a notice in advance for international assignments. But for domestic games, it's 2-week notice, sometime a week. So.
What's it like going home to Jackson, Mississippi with everything that you've accomplished? What's it like going back home?
I mean, I feel like it's pretty normal for the most part. Other than I get recognized a lot more by people. It's a smaller city, so it's not super big. But in the soccer community, it's like, oh my gosh, like, what are you doing here? Why are you at our game? Why are you watching? So it's usually, I would say within the soccer community, it's very like, kind of like people are like awestruck, which I think is crazy because I'm like, I went to school with you guys. Like, I know you.
Why are you watching this Jackson State Belhaven match? What are you doing?
Yes, they're like, why are you here? Like, what's happening? Like, is there something going on? I'm like, no, I'm just visiting home. I figured I'd come watch a game. Like, so that part is kind of surreal. It's kind of funny to see, especially because a lot of the referees I obviously know from when I was coming up. So
then my last question for you, for those that are not currently officials in any way.
Yep.
How would you convince someone who's thinking about it that might want to do it? How would you convince them about, yes, you should become an official because blank?
Yeah. I would say the easiest thing is just it's so flexible at the beginning. You're able to make your own schedule. You can let the assigners know when you're available, whether you have, a full-time job, whether you're in school, or whether you're at home and you just want to kind of pick up something here and there. It's really flexible at the beginning. If you, especially at the youth level, you let the assigners know. Right now, there is a need for youth referees. So they will take you and you will make a decent amount of money because they are needed. And it's just fun, especially if you've been a part of the game and you played. Like, to be able to be a part of the game in any aspect is invigorating and it's exciting and it's kind of like an adrenaline rush. So to be a referee, one, you learn the game better, so you understand it better, whether you're watching it on TV or whether you're coaching or still playing, adult pickup, or playing youth at the youth level, you understand the game better. And it's exciting to be a part of the game in this aspect and to realize that you are a vital and important role on the field for the game to happen. So,
Alyssa Nichols, the newest FIFA ref for the United States, the first from the great state of Mississippi. Jason Longshore and I have been, obviously it's been a pleasure to call matches with you that we've seen in USL Championship, but it's great to get to see that this is the next step in the process where you get to wear the FIFA badge and wander around the hemisphere, and we'll keep an eye on things. Alyssa, thanks for hanging out. You have survived a Soccer Down Here 1v1. We'll be keeping an eye on you and all the different leagues that you're in, and we'll be catching up soon, and we'll be watching as it goes. Thanks for hanging out.
Thanks for having me.